I'm Tony Russo, and this is In Case You Missed It from Kates-Boylston for the week ending Friday, September 26th, 2025. Got a lot of great stories for you this week. Gonna try to keep it short as I've been, but I don't know how much luck I'm gonna have because there's some really cool things that I think would be fun to talk about, and we will get into all of those things after this word from our friends at NGL. Head to the National Guardian Life Insurance Company booth at this year's NFDA convention in Chicago to meet keynote speaker and pianist Felipe Gomez. Plus, be on the lookout for a big musical surprise as you head into the exhibit hall. For over 116 years, NGL has focused on providing pre-need insurance that hits all the right notes. Stop by booth 1639, that's 1639, October 26th through 29th to learn more. So there are a couple of stories this week that one is definitely about a bad actor, and another one might be just about an overenthusiastic actor. But one of the things that I like to do in this series is remind you that people are watching and that these stories come out. And now that there is the internet, a story in a small town can still reach lots of other people. And that's really more important for the story I'll be talking about later than for this story. But this story is the follow-up of a follow-up, I think, from earlier in this year. And it involves a gentleman named Cody Anderson. And Mr. Anderson and his co-defendant, Thomas Bateman, were sentenced earlier this year to 2 years in prison for a scheme in which they attempted to bilk a 88-year-old woman out of about $1 million of her $20 million estate by becoming the executor and saying that they would take care of everything. They got caught and they were sentenced, and that is or should have been the end of the story. But Mr. Anderson was in a position where he had to sell the funeral home, and so his plan was to, while he was in jail, sell the funeral home to his mother, who would run it and then put all of the profits into a trust for him to collect when he got out of jail. Now, over the last several months, especially, and we're going back to Texas. Don't worry about it. Texas is dying to make sure that they're always in Funeral Service Insider's weekly news report. But we've been going over this notion that it's important that the public believes that someone is in charge, that there's some redress for either bad actors or, mistakes that are irrevocable. That's a tough word to say out loud. And too often, I think, or too often in the news, we get cases where these government agencies have let down the public, and it's always a bad look. This is not the case. The South Carolina Funeral Board stamped this deal out almost immediately, had the funeral home closed, because not only was the deal that he would get all the profits, it wasn't clear who, in addition to Mr. Anderson's mother, would be the funeral home owner. So the idea was that he would muddy the waters and spend his 2 years in jail and then come back and resume, I guess, his operations. And the fact that the funeral board took a hard stance and said, you can't keep making money from this, you're in jail for trying to steal from old people, is heartening. I mean, it shouldn't be heartening. That's what should happen. But the fact that it did, and that it happened swiftly and without any question, is worth at least celebrating a little bit. So, well done in South Carolina, and we are looking forward to seeing how this shakes out. I'm sure I'll be talking about it a little bit more as the week goes on. This story is behind a paywall, but there is a link to it in the show notes anyway. So I don't think this counts as, quote, news, but it is going to get told to you anyway, and I hope that you enjoy it. One of the ways that I find the stories that I go over here is with Google Alerts. I get tips from people, and sometimes I'll find something on social media, but my Google Alerts are the primary place that I get stories. The downside is, and I don't know if you know this or not, but sometimes when you refresh your website or you make a big change to your website, a lot of your stories will get republished as if they are new. I have to be very careful about that because in the past I've come very close. I probably have once or twice even reported on stories that were a year old or 2 years old because I missed the publish date and the information was new and fresh. This is 10 years old. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. And it is from the Foresight companies. Daniel M. Izzard had a presentation at the 2015 ICCFA convention and exposition, and he gave a presentation called Rescue Me, the 5 changes the funeral and cemetery professions must make to remain viable. Now, this was, again, 2015, so this is a decade ago. So this is stuff that, already in the pocket and out the door, right? I don't think so. I think he could probably give this presentation tomorrow. I think that it's still relevant, and I think the fact that it's still relevant should be a concern. So let's see what Daniel Izzard of the past has to say about the funeral business then. First, he argued that the public's perception must change. Funeral directors spend 95% of their time assisting the living, not the dead, and cemeteries must become places of encouraged activity rather than passive graveyards. Second, the business model must shift away from reliance on merchandise sales like caskets towards service fees that are adequate regardless of whether cremation or burial is chosen. Third, staffing and licensure requirements must be reformed, reducing the emphasis on embalming and using paraprofessionals to lower the costs and attract staff. 4, the primary value proposition for cemeteries must become perpetual care, requiring adequate endowment funding, while funeral homes' value is based on trust and counseling. And 5, the profession's paradigm must shift from focusing solely on death to celebrating life, and cemeteries must revise outdated master plans that were designed before high cremation rates. Again, 2015, this is still very, very, very relevant. And so, of course it is. And it's something that I thought needed to be shared. So hopefully 10 years from now, some of these lists, some of the items on this list will get checked off. But as you'll hear in our next story, some people are just getting the message now. For example, LehighValleyNews.com reported this week on big changes at the Easton Cemetery, that is Easton, Pennsylvania. And this is more of an outreach story because it's stuff that they've been doing. But fortunately, they were able to get the newspaper to come in and do a big story on it, which included photos. It's a beautiful cemetery. It's a beautiful old cemetery founded in 1849. And their big new push is to increase the number of volunteers. They have started trying to do more with getting people to just come in either for pay or for free to events. And they're working on becoming an arboretum. And there's just trying to generate excitement. Sharon Ashton, who is the treasurer of the cemetery board of directors, said that she wants people in the neighborhood to feel comfortable going there and to make it more of a neighborhood spot. They're working on becoming an arboretum. They're working on having more water gardens to handle runoff. That kind of marshy place where you can have to help with prevent too much standing water. And also on booking new events, they have plenty of history in there already, and they're trying to, there's a Declaration of Independence signer and some other famous type folks that they're hoping to highlight. But the idea is they know that it is well past time to reimagine, as our editor constantly says, the editor of American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, Tom Nondorf, what can a cemetery be? And this is kind of an announcement of what Easton Cemetery looks forward to being in the future. And these are the kinds of stories that are worth telling if you are a cemeterian, that are worth telling to the local press, not just doing it, but, people coming out and gardening, they're trying to expand their volunteer program. There are a couple of full-time employees. There's like 2 full-time employees, a couple part-time employees, but most of the programs are run by volunteers, which can be difficult if you don't generate enough excitement. Again, that's why it's important for people from the neighborhood to feel like they can belong there, and there are people, because there are always people who want the cemetery to stay quiet and empty, and who are against this idea of active cemeteries. And of course they make their voices heard, because that's just the kind of thing that those people do. One of the things that I would recommend, and now this I'm being a little sarcastic, is just take a picture of an old, underused, overgrown cemetery where there's no more upkeep on the graves, and there are cracks in the pavement, and graves are knocked over, monument stones are knocked over, and ask them if that's what they want, because that is what a cemetery looks like if it's only for visiting on the special occasions of your loved one who is interred there. Very excited for all the things that are going on in the Easton Cemetery, and I think that they're excited for it too. So good luck to them in their move forward. And along those lines, and this isn't really its own story because I'm still trying to work out a story on what's going on in New Jersey. I wasn't able to speak with anyone on the record about the human composting law, but I do want to quote from this article in NewJersey.com, because again, it's so great, appropriate on the heels of this story, how cemeteries should change and how cemeteries should try to do more to encourage people to enjoy them. The New Jersey Cemetery Association sent the following to the state, which essentially cut it out of the human composting conversation, allowing for a new form of human decomposition to be performed outside of a cemetery is upending current law in a major way. And as more and more cemeteries struggle to stay afloat financially, this is the last thing state lawmakers should be doing right now. In a time of radical change, there are going to be 2 camps, and one camp is going to be more interested in fighting the change and another in embracing the change. And the ones that embrace the change sometimes go too far, and the ones that fight the change sometimes are correct. And I don't want to draw too stark a line, although I am a change junkie myself. But I feel like in this case, it's time to embrace change at the cemetery and at the funeral service level. And I'm going to talk to you next about an op-ed piece I saw in the USA Today, of all places, that is against change in funeral service. So we'll get to that just next. So in the USA Today newspaper, or I guess at least on the website, there was an op-ed piece by Denny Dormady, and he is a Los Angeles Times Magazine published comedy writer, a licensed California funeral director, a Vietnam War veteran, and active Screen Actors Guild member, as well as the author of Confessions of an LA Funeral Director. And he published a opinion piece saying essentially that the problem was that people weren't being buried anymore. And he blamed the fact that people weren't being buried anymore on modernity. That people didn't want to take the time to go to funerals. I think the headline was something like, let me get the headline just right here. The headline was, I'm a funeral director. Those are always going to put me off anyway. But the headline is, I am a funeral director. These days, it's only me and the deceased at graveside services. And he goes on to talk about how the cremation rate is going to hit 82% and artificial intelligence is kind of taking over everything. He says that this allows for more denial in funeral service and death care in general, and that people are embracing this denial, and that's why they're not having funerals anymore. Fine. I don't necessarily agree with him, but one of the last parts of the essay really bothered me, and that's why I wanted to share it with you, because I really felt like it was bothersome. He said that one of the things he does to encourage people to have funerals is to let them throw a handful of dirt on the casket as kind of like a final remembrance. And I grew up, as I wasn't just the attendee at lots of funerals. I grew up in one of those weird spaces where, the two generations, the third generation ahead, all kind of died over the course of 5 or 6 years. So I got to go to a lot of funerals, and I had already seen, because it was the 1970s and you could watch whatever you could get away with watching on television. I'd already seen, funerals on television where they, threw the dirt in and lowered the casket into the ground. And I remember being surprised that didn't happen. And I was told at the time, and this is in the 1980s, that, people were upset by seeing the casket lowered, and people were upset by having to throw dirt into this open hole. And so instead we were encouraged to put a flower on top of the casket and then to leave the casket above the grave until they came back later and put it away in secret. And I think it's convenient to remember the efforts, the lengths to which the industry may have gone to sanitize the process. But I was, as a former participant in the process, that was always my issue. I felt like this wasn't a thing for me. I was intrigued by throwing the dirt, and I was intrigued by lowering the casket, and then I was told that that's not what we do anymore. The thing is, and I think this is important, and this comes out all the time, people are tired of being told what to do. And that is the beginning and the end of some of the difficulties with this transitional period of funeral service. We keep saying people want to have options, but we also keep saying people want to have options that are really more convenient. So this is really the kind of differentiating point in funeral service. And I speak with too many people who are way too open to be turning anyone away. And those are the people that I feel, and those are the attitudes that I feel will probably succeed into the future. Whatever you want within the law, they are happy to do. And then there are other people who say, no, if we just show them that our way is the best way, then they will choose our way. And I mean, wish you the best of luck with that attitude. You know, if you continue to force people to do things the way that you know is the best way for them, instead of encouraging them to think about how they envision what would be best for them, then things aren't going to go great, I don't think. So that is my little speech for the week. And now I want to tell you about another fun story from Texas. That doesn't involve Kristen Tipp, so that's a positive right there. Now, before I go too far with this story, I want to let you know that I have reached out to the Relevant Funeral Home for comment or to get a sense of whether this was a super slanted story. And they have not gotten back to me yet. And I'm not saying that they won't. When they do, I will update this story, and I might do a little feature on it for next time. But in Potter County in Amarillo, Texas, according to the Amarillo Globe News, there was a surprise uprising over the county's removal service at a recent county commissioners meeting. And so what happened was this company called Schaefer Mortuary Services was selected as the new transport service. They came in with the lowest bid, but the person who has been running it for a while, which is Job Mortuary, came in to object. And Job Mortuary brought with them all of the rest of the funeral directors from Amarillo, Texas. And transport is a big thing. So this is how it worked. So Job Mortuary Service had the contract last time. They had won with the lowest bid. Job Mortuary does not have a funeral home. They are solely a transportation service. And 2 of the 4 districts used Job Mortuary Service, but 2 of the other districts used Schaefer Mortuary Services because Schaefer Mortuary Services wasn't charging for removals. They weren't charging the county. They were doing it for free, as opposed to Job Mortuary, which invoiced the county for about $50,000 for half, essentially, of the removals in the county. And now the reason that it wasn't just Job Mortuary versus Schaefer Mortuary in this service, as you know if you're a funeral director, is that first call is critical. And if you go and you're like, hi, I'm with Schaefer Mortuary Services, I'm taking your loved one into our care, you can choose whatever funeral home you want. I mean, what are people going to say? Well, who else can you recommend? So that was the main complaint from the other funeral directors, who testified for 2 hours about why it was not fair for any funeral home to get this contract. But I've reported on this is something that happens. And again, if you're involved in county transportation, you know that it's something that comes up because there's this weird balance, right? The county doesn't want to pay too much, but nobody wants to do it necessarily for free because there is competition. But if you can get the county to pay for some of them and you can do the ones for free and the ones near you for free and kind of keep that, increase your odds of getting that family to choose your funeral home, then that makes the most business sense. But this is an equity question. And so what the funeral directors, other funeral directors all said was that if they weren't going to give it to someone who didn't have a funeral home like Job Mortuary, they should let everyone have like a chance, be on a rotating schedule. And I've seen that in a lot of other places. Actually, one of the last times I reported on this may have been 2 years ago, and I feel like it was in Iowa. And it was the same thing. There were 2 funeral homes, and there was a question about whether someone was giving favoritism to one or the other. I love the idea of having an independent person who who picks up the remains and brings them to wherever they need it to be brought. And again, this is a county, so a lot of times it's going to be, to the medical examiner or, to whatever storage facility for the family to do, the selection and the identification, all of those things. So I reached out to the Schaefer Mortuary folks, and they seemed willing to talk to me. They just, you guys are busy, and they were busy. So I would like to get their side of it before we make any huge pronouncements about whether or not that was a cool thing to do. But it is interesting. So I don't know how you guys feel about transportation and whether it's fair in your jurisdiction or not, but I would love to. So please feel free to reach out to me and let me know how things are going where you are and whether your transportation system is fair or not. I know, as Mr. Izzard said earlier in this conversation, having transportation professionals that aren't funeral directors is increasingly important. And I know that there are still plenty of states where the funeral director must be the person to pick up the human remains. And, again, much like a lot of these laws, they're not bad. They're just not built for a big evolution, which is clearly what's going on here in funeral service. So that, I think, will do me for this week. In case you missed it, From Kates-Boylston is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Oh, and videoed by me. If you're watching on the video, we have a YouTube channel where this is a live video instead of just the recording, but I'm happy to have you listening on your podcatcher as well. Please follow us wherever you are listening now. And if you would like to reach out to me, you can send me an email at arusso@kbpublications.com, and we will check in with you next time.